Okay, today I have a special guest, and it's early over here on the west coast of America. And the reason it's early is because it's 11 a.m. over on the east coast where she is. And I definitely wanted to take this call when she could because she is very much in demand, and I knew that I could just get a slot with her, and that would be fantastic. So, Jen is a cosmetic chemist, meaning she works with skincare brands and I believe in other categories as well, creating formulations. She's very opinionated. She came to me through a doctor, a dermatologist, Adrian Chan, who I also interviewed. And a lot of what both of those women are doing is correcting some beliefs within the wider wellness and skincare world that they think are hazardous, misinformed, and so on. So we're going to get into some of that and some of those nitty gritty opinions. But also, I want to just start with the question of what is a cosmetic chemist? A little bit how she got into that work, but more so how do brands incorporate cosmetic chemists into their formulations? Do you need one? What's it like for her to work with marketing teams and founders? And then we'll also explore some of the ingredients and her process of coming up with formulations for skincare. So I must say also Jen is the founder of the EcoWell, which is a trusted source for many thousands of followers, I believe, on skincare and on formulations. So I'll just give Jen a minute or two as I collect my notes and welcome some of you and drink my coffee. So I'm inside today because it's raining outside in Seattle, and my voice is a little bit low because it's 8 a.m. here and I still have a couple sleeping puppies around. So let's see who's with us. Here she is. Hi, Jen.
How's it going?
It's good. It's early over here on the East Coast, so I'm very cozy with my first cup of coffee.
Thank you for agreeing to do this interview so early. How's your day
No,
going so far?
it's nice. Yes, it's raining, and more importantly, yours. So are you in New York, Boston? Where are you based?
I'm in Canada, actually.
Oh,
I
in Canada.
live,
Okay.
yeah, pretty close to Toronto in Waterloo. It's like an hour south.
Okay, amazing. So, okay, you are so different than like the world I'm occupied in the sense that like you probably see me as just very immersed in like wellness, right? And like not chemistry, for instance. And I want to get into the nitty gritty of like, I want to get into all the opinions and all the ingredients. That sounds so fun. And I know you do a lot of your time on that. But I also want to just start with the umbrella of like, what is a cosmetic chemist? Um, and sort of go from that very beginning point.
Usually when people are saying cosmetic chemist, usually it's like a formulator, although there are a lot of different chemists that work in the industry, but generally products in the bottles of your products, uh, formulations in the products, did I say that wrong?
No.
They're usually formulated by chemists. So they're specialized scientists that have training or like whether that's from work or education that specialize to the chemistry of your cosmetic products. If that makes
Okay.
sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. I mean, it answers my question in the sense that you, as a cosmetic chemist, are responsible for the formulation. Are you like the end all be like, is it like the marketing team is like, I want all of this? You put together the formulation, you give it to them, and they're like, we need it to be less of this. It comes back to you, you edit it. So you are
Yeah,
like
I
the
mean,
last
it
hand.
really depends on which chemist you're working with. And I'll also say, like, when I'm talking about a cosmetic chemist as well, like, there are a lot of people calling themselves chemists, and
Okay.
probably like people with at least a Bachelor of Science and then probably additional training. In my books, they would be the cosmetic chemist, just so your audience knows, just because there's a lot of people calling themselves that. But it really depends on the chemists that like you are, the position you are in, whether you're working with a contract manufacturer, with your brand, with I work as an independent chemist. So for me, yeah, I will handle the whole formulation job. In other companies, some larger contract manufacturers or some of the larger brands, I'll have many chemists on a team that are working on the formulation. So it really depends on the scale and scope of the project. When I work with a client, though, they'll typically give me like a brief and they'll tell me everything that they're looking for in the formula. And again, this is different from lab to lab, because sometimes there are very specific stipulations for the formulations that a chemist will produce. And sometimes like there's also set formulations that they'll use. But for me, people
Yeah.
will send a brief. They'll tell me everything that they want, the feel, the function. Maybe there's a comparable product on the market that they want me to look at as, I guess, a benchmark to go from.
Yeah.
And then I'll start to do the research and development, find ingredients that would be compatible with that, and start developing samples, ship them to them. They make critiques, and then we go back and forth until they're happy with the formulation. So yeah, they'll give me like a assessment based off of like, oh, I want it to feel more heavy. I want it to be more brightening or whatever they're looking for, and then I could just go and make adjustments in the formulation as we go, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So to get like an active picture of what you do, is some of your work like actually taking like pipettes and like putting liquid between different bottles?
Yeah, well, like I'll usually start a formulation from the start for
Hmm.
each product, because it's not so simple as just putting, oh, I'm gonna put a like a X pipette of X ingredient in this one and not in this one. So you write out the full formulation, and then you might have to rewrite it out per each formula. So generally, I'm working on one sample iteration, like the formula of it at a time before I move on to the next one. So then, like as I'm personally going, then I could also feel like, is it heavy enough for what they were looking for in their brief? And then I could feel it and then make improvements from there. So yeah, I like incrementally work on the samples. Hopefully that
Got
makes
it.
sense.
So it's like if you were a chef, it's like you very much start with a meticulous recipe, and then at a certain point you allow yourself to test and feel, and then go back and maybe edit the recipe before then coming back to the client. Is that
That's my
correct?
approach.
Yeah.
And
Like,
every chemist, like I know some
yeah.
chemists that don't try their prototypes, which is very weird for me.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so it really depends. I like to try all my samples, and I like to have it for a little bit of time before I start to ship it out.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you also want to look at like the stability of the product, and that's another aspect of it. But every chemist has their own approach to how they go about formulating a product.
Yeah. Can you tell us, if you can't tell us specifically the brands that you've worked with, can you tell us like the type of brand, the typical brand who will come to you and your independent chemist who you work with?
Yeah, so the larger brands will typically have a team already. They'll have more of a budget to work with, like a larger lab that has quite a few chemists working on this specific project. So usually when people are looking for an independent chemist, it's usually the smaller companies. So usually my clients are smaller indie brands. I do work with like ingredient suppliers. Sometimes and I mean, they're often independent as well. They'll often need like a formulation so they can use it as like a prototype for formulators.
Yeah.
So that's a very different thing than producing a formula for market. I specialize in skincare. While I do makeup quite often, It's not something that I particularly like because it's a big hassle to clean up my lab space afterwards. I don't do, and I'll do like hair care as well. Not my specialty, but I'm trained in any formulation. I don't do like reactive chemistries. That I'll just pass it off to a colleague that has that specialization. So usually skincare, and then usually with indie brands, but sometimes I work with research groups. I've worked with a university who's working on producing an ingredient, and so then I made them formulation so that they can use it to give to their prospective formulator customers.
Yeah, cool. And what makes an indie brand an indie brand?
I would say they're independent. They're not like owned by a large conglomerate. Um, I usually think of them as smaller, but they're not always smaller. So I would just say they're just like an independent brand, not owned by a conglomerate that owns many brands, as
Yeah.
is the case for like most products at like the drugstore.
Yeah, and I just want to ask you about a couple trends with, among the people who approach you, among the indie brands. Are you seeing female founders, male founders, both equal distribution?
I would say it's mostly female founders, but I have worked with, I would say probably 70% of my clients are females.
Hmm.
Um, but there are male founders. There's just, I guess, less of them interested in launching an indie brand. Or I don't know. That's just my
Yeah.
anecdotal experience.
Yeah, exactly. And then what kind of budget, like do most of the brands who come to you, do they have investors? Are they working off of their own savings? What would you say on average people have, if you have a sense of what their budget and their funding is?
I think there's a real mix of people who have investment, um, people who have. I'm working with a client that has like a number of businesses that are funding this specific business, or like a lot of them are. This is kind of a dream that they want to have a product, and then they've saved up for it. Many of them already like they have jobs on the side, and this is just their project, and eventually they'd like to launch a product.
Yeah.
So it really varies. I
Right,
would
right.
say there's, yeah.
And is it a requirement to have a cosmetic chemist? Like I'm just pulling out like a product like this, from the range of like this to this, do you think both of these products had cosmetic chemists behind them?
Uh, Fresh, I would assume does. I believe they're a bigger brand, but I
Yeah,
really
they
don't know.
are.
I
Yeah.
haven't looked into the brand, so I'm not sure. It
Yeah.
really depends on where you are. Like if you're in the EU, because the bar for entry is a little bit higher, and you have to meet all these regulatory like testing requirements, then usually people will go and get some kind of support. Like most legitimate companies will have a chemist. Um, Sometimes they don't in North America because the bar to entry is so much lower. And I find that sometimes people like it's people who want to do this in their kitchen. This happens a lot because of the regulatory bar for entry is a bit lower in North America. They don't realize because, and then there's not that bar to force it. So then they don't know that it's a good idea to have a chemist. They don't often know that people are actually cosmetic chemists in the space, and sometimes they don't even meet the basic regulations, but they just don't know. I see that kind of as a challenge in the North American space. So not every brand has a chemist. I think
Yeah.
probably brands should have chemists that understand the formulations,
Yeah.
but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And then just to go back to trends, like when you are being asked to develop a product, what is the product that you're most often being asked to develop? And I also love that you brought up like people will show me an example from another brand and they're like, I really want this vitamin C paste or this lightweight moisturizer. Can you give us a sense of what people lately have been coming to you with in terms of requests?
I mean, I do a lot of different types of. I probably serums. I'd say serums is probably the hot product, but I do a lot of other products like AHA sprays, jellies, um, lipsticks are always popular. Um, but I'd say probably the product that I'm formulating the most is serums.
And how do you, like, you are someone who I admire because you are opinionated and you have a sense of ethics, it seems like, to what you do. How do you decide on whether to work on a project? Like if someone's coming to you and they're like, we want a jelly, we want it to have these components, and in the center of your brain, you're thinking, this has absolutely no value. In fact, it's even harmful, or maybe it just has no value. How do you decide on whether to work on a project where you don't see value?
Um, well, it depends on how busy I am. So sometimes sometimes I am completely booked and I can't take more clients. Sometimes that's not the case, depending on the season. So I guess my stipulations for my clients alter, but regardless of who it is, I'll always be upfront. I am quite opinionated. Probably some people don't like it. But if somebody is presenting like, oh, I want paraben free, I want to make all these types of claims, I'll always come up on them like, well, first, like I wouldn't use free from claims on your marketing. I'll always tell my clients that I would focus on the good. I try it. And, I'm usually, most of my clients take my advice, which I'm really happy about. And I think most of my clients reach out to me because I see that this is kind of my code of ethics.
Right. Like you're an advisor and a consultant as much as you are a chemist.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'll give my feedback on what they want, but at the end of the day, it's their project. So if I have the time, even if I'm not super happy with how they're going to market it, I'll usually take a project on. Will I promote it? Probably not, but I will help them develop a safe product for market and give them all the tools so they understand why what they're saying may or may not be correct. But I mean, I haven't had a case where I've looked at my client's marketing and it's like, oh, that's so wrong.
Okay.
Usually
Right.
I'm happy with the messaging that my clients put out. And like, yeah, I'm pretty opinionated. So I, most of my clients, I mean, they're paying for my advice. So it makes sense that they probably want it.
Right. And they know that in advance. Mona asks, what's the best resource to use to learn about ingredients? A resource that chemists or developers use. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Mona. It's a great one.
Um, so it depends on like what kind of information you're looking for, and how much you're willing to read. And so like for safety ingredients, myself personally, I usually will refer to the SCCS and CIR. They have opinion and reviews that you can access. So if there's like a controversial ingredient, like ethoxylated ingredients or parabens or sulfates or whatever, and you're concerned about it and you want to see if it's safe, then you can go and look through. They will compile the evidence, and it's usually, well, it is put together by a very legitimate toxicologist, so you can see what they have to say. I'll also look on PubMed to see what the research is like. But I mean, looking at research is challenging. You have to look at it critically, and not everyone has the tools or time to look at it.
Yeah.
A
Who's
resource that
curating it?
PubMed is like I guess a database for peer reviewed journals, but like you have to be like critical
Yeah.
of like what's the journal, who are the who's the public, like who's the researcher, should I say, who's
Yeah.
funding it, what are the methods, I mean, there's all these things to be
Of
critical
course.
about.
That's
I
why we
also
like
like,
you. We like you
yeah.
because you're reading the stuff and you're digesting it and telling us about it. Do you have other people, let's say on Instagram, that you can recommend us following to get some information that's been
Oh my gosh,
digested?
there are so many, and I think a few of them might even be in this conversation. I have on my website, I put a list of Instagram accounts, and actually, I put a list of resources. So if you're looking for a good resource section, so I went from like the more technical to the least or lesser technical. Skin Perspective is one of them. She's on my list of. Sorry, she just commented on my list of Instagram accounts that I really like. So on my website, you can click on my resources page. Sorry, that's my dog. I'm back. But I listed some accounts. I listed the CIR and SCCS on there. I've also included, there's cosmeticsinfo.org. That is quite good. It was published by the Cosmetics Alliance, and a number of other groups came together, scientific groups came together, and they use it as kind of a resource to combat the misinformation from the EWG. If your followers aren't familiar, it's not a great resource. But yeah, all of that is right on the resources page on my website.
Okay, I feel like we're getting to the heart of like why there's this big wellness world that it's like I am trying to discover why I got into like a passion for skincare, and it's so different than your passion for skincare. Like it's so different. Like I feel like you come from this like place of chemistry, and it's like it's very easy, I think, at like a deep part of the world to say like people who want to read nitty gritty information, they're like the best ones, and the people who like have it as part of a lifestyle, they're like the misinformed ones. So let's like break down some of the contrast. Like where, like what do you think of the current state of the wellness world, and like what's the best way to kind of touch up your knowledge if like truly I'm not like I don't ever want to be reading the SCCS, like I'm never going to be doing that. So but like I love my creams, like I like my dry brushing. So where can we touch up, like we can follow you. I want to hear your current opinions on the wellness world and like how we can all get a little bit better and get along a little easier.
I mean, there's a lot of misinformation. Has been a long time problem, yeah. Misinformation with marketing. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misinformation.
Right.
I also really take issue with some of the claims being made in the green and clean beauty community just because they're so far removed from reality. And like, I'm very passionate about sustainable cosmetics, or more like going in a direction of more sustainable products. But most of the information out to the public, and even in industry, this is a really big problem, is wrong. It's like not in line with the body of evidence. Even at scientific conferences, they will allow people that are just completely out to lunch. This drives me crazy. Have a platform as a speaker at a scientific conference. And
like, give us an example, like who, like what kind of person, you don't have to say a name, but like what kind of person would get a platform that you'd like, they're out to lunch?
Well, I mean, the EWG sometimes gets a platform. They're out to lunch. And I can also expand. There was a question about the EWG, so I can expand on it. There was also a few years ago, I went to a conference in Paris. It was a pretty expensive conference, and I posted a conversation with this person. He owns a microflora promoting product, which, I mean, there's not really that much evidence, but they really science wash, and they published something in a predatory journal, and then the people that were curating the conference didn't look at the study to see like, oh my gosh, this isn't a good study, and this is a predatory journal, and they got this big platform, and they were just fear-mongering ingredients. They had no idea what they were talking about. I actually went because I wasn't so critical going in, and now I've become a lot more critical after this experience. I asked him prior to the conference, like, oh, would you like to come on my podcast for an interview? This is really interesting what you're researching. And then I went to ask him. He just gave a talk about the skin microflora and how all synthetic ingredients are destroying the skin microbiome. It was his claim. And then I went to start the interview, and he didn't even know what a microflora was. He couldn't define it. And it's like, aren't you studying this? So people like that sometimes get a platform at these scientific conferences, and that, to me, is unacceptable. But sometimes conference runners aren't scientists, so like it's hard to be critical of all this.
Yes.
This is an area that I would personally like to see improve in the industry.
Yes.
I'm trying my best to do that with my platform. I could ask the question. The EWG has been in business of misinformation for years and years. That is absolutely true. I can expand on the EWG.
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah, let me ask you this, because I feel, especially for my followers, like I want to get, like, I have certain friends in my life where, like, I have a friend who's a teacher to high school students, and she's like so immersed in like queer movement, everything, social justice, everything. And hanging out with her, I get like tune-ups on like phrases and important concepts. And I feel like with you, I just want to get like a quick tune-up. Like, what is a predatory journal? Briefly.
So there are journals that oftentimes you have to pay to be a part of, and they don't really peer review with the same kind of standard that you would from like a journal like Nature. So like it's often referred to as like pay pay to publish. So
Okay.
like if you've got the money, you can publish it.
Got it. And
But
people read predatory journals, like people pay and read.
well, yeah, sometimes you'll find them in PubMed, which is like the resource I look to. So then you have to be critical of like
Okay.
the journal it's coming from, look through it. So yeah,
Okay.
pay for play is usually what's going on with these predatory journals.
Okay. Is it easy for you to give us just a couple that we should avoid that you know are predatory journals and we should just watch out for their names?
I'm probably couldn't do that just off.
Okay.
Off
There are a
cuff.
ton.
There are a lot.
Okay.
But I actually had a podcast though that I went through this topic in a lot of detail with a very good science communicator, Jonathan Jerry. We went through the topic of like what is good evidence, because the legitimacy of the journal is only one part of it. There's a lot of different layers to look at, and I think he did a really excellent job going through the topic of, because it's a really big one. What is good evidence?
So I'll direct people to that podcast, and you already have Jonathan Jerry, What is Good Evidence, and Science Wash. Tell us what science wash is.
Science washing is like when you put all these references, all these scientific references, they're just in your reference section and then they're there. And sometimes what's in the body of your post doesn't actually represent what's in the references. And this is something just kind of diving into the question of like, why isn't the EWG reliable? If you go through the references, sometimes what's in the references doesn't actually represent what's in their Skin Deep database. They, for example, prior to me pointing it out, they have since changed it, but with their methylparaben entry, they cited the SCCS report from 2011 or 2012. And so the conclusion was that as used in cosmetics, methylparaben is not estrogenic, or demonstrably it won't, like from what we know right now, not estrogenic. And so they used that as a reference to say that it was estrogenic. So that kind of thing would be science washing. They're just filling up the reference section just to make it look like they have scientific support, but in reality, it doesn't really match up.
Got it.
Sometimes they'll publish poor studies, but really it's just the practice of filling up the reference section to make what you're saying more legitimate or seem more legitimate.
I have a question that might be like stepping out a bit. So last night I watched Becoming, the Michelle Obama documentary on Netflix, and it's like about her book tour. And it was fascinating. I recommend it to anyone on here, and female founders and all of the above and below. And this makes me ask you, like, for you, from like a purpose place, what is the purpose for what you do? Why do you do what you do? What drives you?
I would like to see my industry do better. I would like to see consumers be more informed, because consumers are what's driving the industry. And right now, because all the fear mongering out there, I find that consumers are driving us to a place that isn't really better. And this is shaping regulations. And it might be a surprise to many people that regulations aren't always formed by science. It happens. As an example, there's a bill coming into place. I think it's 2020. There's going to be a severe reduction in how much 1,4-dioxane is allowable in ethoxylated ingredients. And so there's this perception that ethoxylated ingredients are unsafe because this very, very, it's like 5 parts per million kind of thing, low percentage of 1,4-dioxane will cause cancer. This chemical is a carcinogen, but there's no evidence to support that as found, because it is a residual chemical from the ethoxylation process. There's no evidence to support that as used or as found in cosmetics, there will be adverse effects for you. No evidence. There's been a lot of studies for this. And also that it will be an environmental toxin. So they're looking at, I think it's the Long Island, that's what it is. There has been historical runoff into the water, so there's higher levels of 1,4-dioxane in the water there. So they're making an assumption that that's coming from cosmetic products, but there's no evidence right now to support that. It's actually from prior chemical industry practices that has caused that. But despite the fact that the body of evidence largely demonstrates that it's safe and not going to contaminate, it's not contributing to the ecosystem disruption that consumers are concerned with. Despite this, regulations are changing. But what's the what's the downside of that? There's been a lot of progression for water saving to improve the sustainability of our products, to reduce the weight for transportation kind of thing. This actually improves sustainability with ethoxylated ingredients, and this isn't something that many consumers think about. So with the 10 parts per million of, there you go, has the same lifetime cancer risk of smoking 30 cigarettes in 60 years.
Can I tell you something let me ask you something. We have, I am, my sister's a doctor and her husband's a doctor, and people like Adrian are a big part of my life. So I'm constantly in debates with doctors. And one of the things that comes up from my end is I'll give you like an exaggerated version of a debate. And my main point is that, and it's such a controversial thing to say, but certain doctors in my life, as opposed to the wellness people in my life, are research obsessed. And I know that research obsessed is like a positive quality that we all admire and that we need, and that helps push the world forward. But like an exaggerated version of a debate I might have with like my brother-in-law is me being like, I'm drinking hot water, I have a sore throat. And he goes like, there's no evidence for hot water helping sore throats. This is like a very, very exaggerated. There probably is a lot of research that says hot water helps sore throats. But the point being, like, in the back of my head, when I have these debates sometimes with MDs, I'm thinking the reason why there's not research for this is because it's not being funded. Nobody wants to fund research that supports like a low cost ingredient as being helpful. Where am I going wrong with that? Or is there truth to what I'm saying? That like, in order to have research, you need to have like wealthy people and companies that are interested enough to invest time into researching it.
Alternatively, there has to be consumer fear, and sometimes that drives a lot of research. So yeah, I mean, there is an issue with like not all ingredients being, I would say, adequately researched to my comfort, but a lot of these hot topic ingredients have been. So with consumer fear of 1,4-dioxane, there has been a lot of research to demonstrate safety. So we have a large body of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand your point if there hasn't been that much research. But when there has been, that's when you should start to look at the research.
Look at the research, right?
It's the same kind of thing with parabens. So sometimes consumer fear, as the case with that example as well, drives a lot of research. So to date, there are thousands of studies to support the safety of parabens as used in cosmetics. That's important. And time again, they come back as safe. I mean, so yeah, it really drives me crazy though when we have all this evidence, and even still regulations are still changing in favor of misinformation. That to me is a crime, and it's having impacts on the safety of our products, but also sustainability of our industry that a lot of consumers aren't aware of.
I just feel like another theme that plays into this though is like we have a cultural narrative of, you know, people for years saying like, putting out posts that are like, you know, take us back to the 60s. We've done a ton of research. Cigarettes actually don't cause any harm. We've done a ton of research. That's why we're letting you know. Consumer fear drove a ton of research. Now we know they don't harm you. Cigarettes don't harm you. So my question for you is like, can we trust a ton of research? Can we trust the people doing research today? Could we trust people doing research in the 60s that might have told us that like cigarettes are fine? We did a ton of research. Trust us. I'm just wondering, like, is there an incentive sometimes to research, and can it thwart our truth?
Yeah, I mean, those are fair points, but the cigarette example is, I mean, there's a lot. The cigarettes without equivocation is the worst thing you can do for your health. Mm-hmm. And it really bothers me when people will compare the cigarette thing with what's happening in the cosmetics, which is one of the safer consumer products, like that.
Right, like you cannot envision like
safe.
There's no possibility in your mind that 10 years from now we find out that parabens are bad.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But what I'm saying though is people don't realize how safe their cosmetic products are, especially compared to like some other types of industries out there. The cosmetics industry really does take care to put out safe products. And I really dislike the vilifying of the industry that I see all the time. But certainly research might change. I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
But that's why looking at the body of evidence is so important. Critically reviewing studies, looking at who's publishing it. And so how do you know when evidence starts to become strong? It's when the same results are replicated from many independent agencies. Then you can start to see significance. So when you can critically analyze research to see that significance, then that's when you can feel more confident with the opinions being made by scientists. Now, this kind of evidence isn't there for everything out there, but for certain ingredients, we have a lot of evidence. So, I mean, this is a big topic.
Yeah.
I can see your point, but you can't just negate that, like negate the body of research because of this concern of like, oh, we might know more in 10 years. I mean, like, also then like, okay, we might know, this is something that I hear a lot. They'll say this about parabens, like, we might find out in like 10 years that it's bad. Okay, well, what's the alternative? Like, what do you want us to switch to? People, it just seems like backwards. People want us to switch then to what? Ingredients that don't have that much research? Switch to, for example, potassium sorbate. This drives me crazy. It just happened I saw this on Instagram.
Yeah.
Maybe last week, of somebody arguing that they were talking about the EWG, how it's rated low on the EWG database, and parabens are a little bit higher, and we're not really sure, so we're just going to go with the potassium sorbate. The reason why it's lower is because we have less evidence, and so like we want to use ingredients with a lot of evidence and not just accept like, oh, there's not that much evidence here, so it must be safer. So I guess my question to you would be like, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
If we're saying that about parabens, what's the alternative?
I guess like I see it very specifically. Like I think there's a body of people, like, first of all, I want to say that there are people that rely probably on parabens for essential medicines, right? Like creams they must put on their face in order to feel comfortable and healthy, and it's medically necessary. And so like this defense of parabens is like absolutely necessary for a segment of people. Their products are only possible with them, and otherwise we need to incorporate ingredients that have even less research, right? But I'm saying for the person like me who has like relatively neutral skin, for me it's just as easy to avoid parabens just because they're being debated. Like I can just opt for things like apricot oil and like non-paraben products. My feeling is that there are a lot of people who have invested interest in defending them. So for me, for someone who doesn't need parabens, like essentially from like a medical perspective, it's just as easy for me to avoid them. Does that make sense?
That's a common argument.
Yeah.
And I understand where you're coming from, but I do disagree. And so like for cosmetic products, the big thing is you want to make sure that they're safe. And microbial contamination is a really big concern.
Right.
Also, the fact that preservatives by function will be potentially allergenic, potentially irritating. So you want to negate that as much as you can when you're formulating a product by using first like less irritating and less allergenic preservatives. And just so you know, parabens in 2018 won the non-allergen
Right.
award.
That's what Adrian taught me. Like they're really low on allergy risk.
And so comparing that to other preservatives, that's important. They are effective at very low percentages, another important factor. And they have a lot of data. We have a strong body of evidence to support their safety profile. And now switching to something that we don't know as much, and that's why I brought up potassium sorbate. And I'm not saying that it's unsafe. I'm just saying that we don't have the same kind of level of evidence.
Yeah.
So then, like, it's just backwards thinking to me to accept that there would be any lesser risk to potassium sorbate as parabens. But the thing is, consumers don't realize with cosmetic products is if a product has an issue with microbial contamination, and this is becoming an issue as there's more natural skincare products on the market, natural preservative systems. Also, potassium sorbate is a nature identical ingredient and it's actually synthetic, that aside.
Right.
There's a lot of products that are becoming contaminated. Contaminated products are probably the biggest public health risk for cosmetic products. People go blind because of products that are like contaminated. So it is of utmost importance that the preservative system is up to snuff. And so I understand what you're saying. I totally do.
Yeah, and I very much understand.
This is obviously a frustration from
I think it's a really excellent point. I mean, if consumers want to straight up just use olive oil on their skin, I'm sure you'd kind of excuse them and say, fine, if you're going to use something that doesn't have preservatives at all, go for it. Like,
but I just want to add to that a little bit more, though, of what I was saying about preservatives, because then to make these natural preservative systems more effective, firstly, there will be a narrow range with which you can use it. For example, acid salts are typically only stable at a pH of lower than 4.5. So a certain pH won't allow the use of those types of preservative systems. Obviously, there will be other ones available to you. But the other thing is, because they're less effective, and you obviously have to use, maybe it's not obvious, you have to use them in a system, but you'll have to use them at higher percentages. When we're formulating products, we typically want to use as little preservative as we can so that we won't be producing an irritating or allergenic product. So the products that require a higher level of preservatives are typically the ones that will have a higher risk of irritancy and allergenicity. So if you, it's just a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more complicated than a lot of people put it out to be. And that is something that really frustrates me.
Right. Interesting.
Sorry, I got a little bit impassioned.
No, I love it. This is why we're talking to you. Like, this is so important. I love it. Of the new preservatives, like, I see you, like, my view on what you just said in a macro sense is you're like, you know, parabens have been a good friend to us. They've been historically studied. We have a good reason to use them. I'm very interested in research. This is what I hear from you. Like, of the new preservatives that we're going to start to research in depth, is potassium sorbate the most interesting one to you?
I don't know. Or
not at all?
It's interesting. I don't know but I mean, it doesn't have broad spectrum efficacy, so you'll have to combine it with other preservatives. And one of I don't know why I tried to say your name. There are a few that work independent of pH. That's right. So I mean, there's a lot of complexity to formulation. I don't like the blanket statements. I guess that's my big thing. I don't know if there's like a specific preservative that is like
that is most promising or that's going to be us moving forward alternative. I mean, there is a segment that feel uncomfortable with parabens, right? So people are developing around them. And I think your point is great, which is that it's leading to contaminated products often.
So I just want to chime in on that, though, because the people, like, you are concerned about it because what you're hearing in the media, and so many people are concerned with it because of what they're hearing in the media, also what they're hearing from the EWG. This fear really started just for like a historical context of the research from a study published in 2004. The Darber study, they had, I believe, 30 individuals. They only looked at breast cancer tissue and they found parabens in breast cancer tissue. So they didn't have a control. That's a big thing, because had they had one, they would have found that parabens is in like pretty much everyone's tissue. It's just there. And also parabens are used in a lot of other products. Also, they're naturally occurring, at least the derivatives for them, in our food. So it sounds like
it was a bad study.
No, it's not a bad study. It's a preliminary study, but it was the interpretation of the study that wasn't good. So then after that, the media interpreted that, parabens cause breast cancer. Correlation doesn't equal causation. So I've just said, like, it's found in regular tissue. And so since then, because of the concern, there has been thousands of studies to demonstrate the safety of parabens, and time again, they come back as safe. So that's where fear has prompted so much research. But at a certain point, then you have to say, well, this might actually be a good option. And there are a reason why scientists typically prefer parabens. It's not because we want to make more money and just full disclosure, I'm getting nothing out of saying that parabens are safer.
Right. Yeah.
And then, like, I work as an independent chemist, and this is a big reason why I do, because people often say, like, oh, well, you're making money for saying this. Like,
Right.
I could care less. The reality, though, is the body of evidence supports its safe use.
Who is
Sorry,
no,
I keep railing on about
no,
parabens.
this is exactly why we're talking to you, and it's amazing. Who stands to benefit from this fear mongering? Isn't it the indie brands that you're mentioning? Like, I mean, the ones who are choosing to be paraben free, aren't they the ones that you would argue have benefited from all this fear mongering? Or tell us why this is happening at all.
That's a big question, but I mean, fear mongering is a very effective marketing strategy. So the companies that employ it will stand to gain by selling more products. If you tell someone that all of the rest of the products out there are going to kill you and come use my products, it's safer.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are concerned. Most people want to purchase the safe products for their family. There's a lot of, I see this especially with unethical towards like pregnant women, a lot of fear mongering directed at them, where like they're probably a little bit more sensitive because rightly they want to like purchase products that are going to be safe for themselves and their baby. So I mean, so the people that are using it stand a lot to gain from making money, but also certifications make money from using fear mongering to compel brands to. They put it onto the market. They compel brands with the messaging as well. They make money by certifying. The EWG makes money by certifying products. Also, they have affiliate links from their website, regardless of who they are. But you can still click through and give a commission back to the EWG by going on their website. So fear mongering is an effective marketing strategy, and that's why it's employed.
What's your opinion of the FDA?
I mean, I don't know if I'm in this in Canada, just
right. Okay, true.
We
Yeah.
have a slightly different regulatory.
Yeah.
Like I think regulations could improve. I think the FDA is trying. I think regulations could improve, but I don't know if I really want to comment past that.
Yeah.
Products on the market, if they comply with regulations, are going to be safe.
Yeah.
A lot of the issues tend to be with companies that people who are afraid don't expect. Like most of the safety issues come from some of the smaller companies that don't really understand the regulatory rigor required to launch products. So it's easier to fall through the cracks with the North American system. And that's where I think it could probably improve, and probably better knowledge sharing. So smaller brands better understand the requirements to launch a safe product. But that's probably as far as I would like to chime in on that point.
Yeah.
I have, if anyone's interested, I have quite a few podcasts from regulatory officials and toxicologists on this point. One with Michael Georges. We went through the regulatory outlook of cosmetics in North America, and we brought up some of the upcoming regulations that are happening in New York and California. So if you want some insight from someone who really knows what they're talking about there, I would go listen to that podcast.
Yeah. Ingredients to avoid. Where do we have enough evidence to say these ingredients are the ones we should avoid? Can you tell us the ones that we should be avoiding?
It really depends on the individual. It depends on how the ingredient is formulated. The whole idea that dose makes the poison is very important. So most ingredients can be used at a safe level if they are within regulatory limits. So we do have regulations in place to guide us for what ingredients will be safe. Some ingredients will be more, for example, allergenic than others, such as some of these preservatives. MIT is a good example. A lot of people have issues with them, but a lot of people don't. So I don't really want to make a blanket statement against or for a certain ingredient type, because it's complex and it depends.
Sure.
But you can use most ingredients suitably in a formulation if you take the right care. And I think it's also important to note that like we should also be asking these questions for the natural ingredients, because sometimes there are safety issues. So we just have to look at it from a case by case basis and formulation by formulation basis and how much percentage is used.
Yeah.
But it's hard to make a blanket statement about an ingredient.
Yeah. I want to go into sustainability a little bit. I loved your post about rose essential oil, and your statement was natural is not always green. Can you talk to us a little bit about that link between not necessarily sustainable and organic, green, natural land?
Well, so there's most of the evidence on agriculture. Okay, so first, the biggest impact for biodiversity loss, which also has an impact for example, carbon emissions and all that, is land use. So we want to, the body of evidence right now looks like this at least, and note, I'm not an agricultural scientist, but I do nerd out on agricultural research, and I have had a lot of conversations with agricultural scientists on my podcast, including a whole panel discussion on this topic. So if you want more from people who are actually experts, then go listen to those conversations. Yes. But we know that if we want to be more sustainable, we have to use as little land as possible. So when there are these crops that are also only used in skincare, using a lot of land, that should raise a concern. And also, our agricultural systems are it's really important that we have food security. Food security should be our primary goal with our agricultural systems, at least from my vantage. So when I think about sustainable ingredients, it's ingredients that are coming from the byproducts of those pre-existing agricultural crops. But it's important to note, land is a big thing. Also, are we cutting down rainforests to produce this? This is a big topic that is really hard to make blanket statements because but anyway, the land intensiveness is really important to this conversation. It's often missed with the assumption that natural will be better, and it just often doesn't, that just often isn't in line with reality.
Isn't it more harmful to take all of our resources versus having nature identical?
Resources help, because every way that you're going to produce an ingredient will require resources, whether versus having a nature identical. Maybe you could further your question.
Ask us another question, Jolita.
I'm just not completely sure what you mean by that, because every ingredient will require resource input. So petrochemical derived ingredients, it's important to note that's typically derived from waste byproducts from industry, and there's no petrochemicals sourced with the sole intent of producing cosmetic ingredients. That's important. Also, you require petroleum to source natural ingredients. That's also important. So when I think about what would be a sustainable natural ingredient, I'm not going to say that natural isn't sustainable, but it's
not necessarily sustainable.
It can be if you're making smart choices. When I think about more sustainable ingredients, I personally gravitate towards ingredients that are byproducts from pre-existing agricultural crops. So there's a lot of use for example, corn derivatives, soy derivatives, rapeseed derivatives, tree, for example. That we have a large lumber industry in Canada, and a lot of the bark is often burnt and buried. So now there's a lot of research into using the bark that would have otherwise been waste in producing ingredients from that. Or biotech is something that I'm a really big fan of, where they're using byproducts from these agricultural crops for sugar, which you can use as a starting point in a bioreactor and produce nature identical type ingredients with a very small input. A very small impact as well compared to the resource requirements for some of these crop ingredients. But it's a case by case basis. For example, something that may come from a tree, wouldn't it be better to replicate the molecule? So I would say it depends, but I am a big fan of biotechnology. So when I compare, for example, sandalwood from a tree, it takes about a decade to come to maturity to start to extract it, to get the viable aroma chemical. and the extraction kills the tree. So if you can produce it with sugar as a starting point in a bioreactor, that's, to me, when I'm looking at the actual environmental impact. So we should be critical of like, what's the actual carbon or what's the actual environmental impact of these things, and not just making an assumption that it's because it's natural that it's going to be better. But when I'm thinking about it, well, probably biotech would be a better option. And that's why there's so much interest in biotech as kind of the frontier for more sustainable ingredients. So we have to be critical of the actual environmental impact of our ingredients, and not just make assumptions and then not go and dive deeper. Because sometimes natural ingredients can be sustainable, but sometimes they're not.
Right. I loved seeing, thank you for that question, Julita. And I loved seeing Barbara Sturm on your feed, because she has such a space, I think, on the internet and among skin people. And I think she gets a lot of credit for being a doctor. And I think she's a very intelligent woman. I think she's very articulate, and she's clearly thoughtful about what she's doing. I want to hear your input on her as a brand and as a person creating skincare.
I mean, she's not even a dermatologist, and I'm not even sure if she actually ever got a practice as a medical doctor. But I mean, she's an isn't her background in orthopedics? It's not in any way in skin.
I know that she definitely like does like fillers and Botox in her clinics. I don't know if she does that because she got some.
She's not a dermatologist, so I don't know what to say if she's doing that in her clinic. I think it's very. There's all these doctors that are launching skincare products. It's a little misleading to put yourself as a brand to it's like the appeal to authority. Oh my gosh, this doctor
right,
or is producing this. Meanwhile, they're not even a relevant doctor, such as in this case. I mean, I looked at her formulations, and I've also looked at some of the things that she said.
What do you think of her formulations?
They're fine. They're nothing special. I looked at her hyaluronic acid serum, and I just calculated out because it consisted of the post maybe you're referring to, or maybe you saw the sunscreen post where I looked at her. She has very weird, inaccurate views about sunscreen, which is probably shouldn't be out there in my opinion. But the hyaluronic acid serum, it consisted of water. There was a preservative followed by phenoxyethanol, followed by hyaluronic acid, followed by another preservative. So it's essentially just water, preservative, and hyaluronic acid. Oh yeah, she did. Look through my post. I have a video of her. You can see it. It was a little alarming. But anyways, for the product, the hyaluronic acid was pretty much water, preservative, and hyaluronic acid, but it was below phenoxyethanol. So that means because phenoxyethanol is regulated to 1%, and I think everywhere, but maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong and there's different regulations somewhere. So that means that the hyaluronic acid must be below that percentage. Hyaluronic acid isn't that expensive. The product was so I priced it out for the ingredients. I just did like a general pricing it was pretty generous. It would be at most like a few dollars, being generous. And she went and sold it for, I think it was $800 for the 100 milliliters. She's just using her, the lab coat effect. She's just using the lab coat effect to make people believe that her products are superior. Now, I hope I don't get sued for saying this, because I know she has sent cease and desist letters to other people. So also the fact that people send cease and desist letters to people who are pointing this out should be a red flag. That like, why are you threatening people with a cease and desist with litigation? Why can't you just like stand behind your products? She's just standing behind. I liked that saying, her lab coat. It's not really anything special.
This other comment is interesting. She worked in orthopedics and created an anti-inflammatory treatment using people's own blood. Does that give her additional credit in your mind, or less?
I would say it probably gives her less credit.
Okay. Then while we're talking about sunscreen, we literally have a minute left, and I want to say thank you. But I interviewed someone recently who's making a sunscreen out of non-nanoparticle uncoated zinc oxide. What's your quick opinion on that?
Well, folks, when you buy a sunscreen in the United States, especially, look for a DIN number. They should be able to substantiate the SPF that they have, and prior, like the products in the United States, at least, are regulated as drugs. Was the product going to be launched in the United States?
It is, yeah.
So look for that DIN number, and then you can feel
Okay.
more confident that they will have gone through
Okay.
the required test.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look for that. I want to say thank you so much. Anyone you guys, thanks for being so active. If you're on here and you want to get interviewed, DM me. Thank you, Jen. You're amazing. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. So appreciate it. I'm going to post stories about what you've said, and many thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Bye.
Bye.